Welcome to Wandering Jews at J Squared Adventures. Travel far enough and you meet yourself. We're your hosts.
I'm Scott Copeland.
I'm Rivka Brahma. Greek music is everywhere in Israel, on the radio, at weddings, and cafés. But why? What is it about these rhythms that speak so deeply to Jewish and Israeli hearts? Music is never just entertainment. It's storytelling. It carries memories, longing, and identity, both personal and communal. This time on Wandering Jews, we will explore how Greek music became a bridge between worlds, Ioannina, Piraeus, and Tel Aviv, and how it symbolizes a discussion about Israeli identity and the Mediterranean surrounding it.
Our journey begins in Ioannina, home to the reimagined Jews, one of the oldest Jewish communities in Europe. For 2 millennia, they prayed in Greek using Yevanic, a Judeo-Greek dialect. Think about other Jewish dialects around the world. Here's a mix of Greek and ancient Hebrew. Their liturgy of the Romaniate community fused Hebrew text with Byzantine musical modes, creating a haunting soundscape.
From the time of the Maccabees in the 2nd century BCE, Jews were already singing and praying in the mountain towns and the seaside ports of ancient Greece. This music was identity in sound, a way of saying we are Jews and we are Greek at the same time. The Holocaust nearly silenced these voices. Today, fragments survive in Ioannina, Chakis, and the New York's Kehilat Kedosha Ioannina. Kehilat Kedosha Ioannina on New York's Lower East Side is the only Romaniote synagogue in the entire Western Hemisphere.
It's amazing how, we talk about the ancient Jewish world and we think of Greece, and the first thing that comes to mind is obviously Hanukkah. But here's a story that a lot of us never knew about a community that existed while the temple was standing, while the Maccabees were actually ruling over Judea.
This is like mind-blowing for someone who grew up here and heard the story of Hanukkah in the kindergarten and thought that's where everything started. But apparently there was a parallel world of Jews on the other side of the sea.
And there are even some historians who say that already in that same period when the Romaniote Jews, their communities were taking root during the Second Temple period, there were actually more Jews living outside of Israel in the diaspora than there were living in Eretz Israel, in the land of Israel.
Which makes you think a lot about our relationship here as Jews and relationships with our fellow Jews outside of Israel.
Narrative, narrative, narrative.
We didn't invent anything, apparently.
If we jump to more modern times and we move away from, let's say, traditional religious prayer and chant, we have to mention the Greek blues, rebetika. We're talking about a form of music that was born in the 20s, in the 1930s, among Greece's working class. People who really knew hard times and hard lives. And for me, a big fan of the American blues, there's a lot here that seems similar. It gave voices to suffering. It was a voice for resilience for people who didn't have voice. And interestingly, the genre's most iconic figure was the legendary Rosa Ashkenazi, often called the Queen of Rebetika, similar in some ways to a figure like Etta James, Billie Holiday, Rosa Ashkenazi.
That sorrow and that deep blues. So Sarah, born as Sarah Ashkenazi, was born in Constantinople, which is now in Turkey. She grew up in Saloniki, which was known as the Jewish metropolis of the Balkans. Like, this is where things happened from a Jewish perspective in those worlds. The mother of Israel. She moved to Athens around 1910, and she built a huge career recording hundreds of songs in Greek, Turkish, and Ladino. Her music was a form of profound storytelling, featuring songs of exile, love, and survival.
Ashkenazi's significance extended beyond her art. During World War II, she bravely joined the resistance against the Nazi occupation in Greece, hiding other Jews, aiding resistance fighters, all the while continuing to perform. Other Jewish voices, Stella Haskell, Amalia Baka, Victoria Khazan, also contributed their unique sound to this music, the music of the margins. We want to play one clip from her body of work, this particular song called My Sweet Canary. And when you think about songs like that mention birds, My Sweet Canary, Rose Ashkenazi, My Sweet Canary, the lyrics go, you took my mind. The morning you wake me up when you chirp so sweetly. Come to me in my arms, one night in my bedroom. Come to me in my arms to cover you with my kisses. And you think of, beautiful songs like A Bird on the Wire. You think about So Lonesome I Could Cry. Classic songs from other places, other worlds. And here in Greek music, capturing a piece of that longing, that loneliness, that desire for love, which is universal.
So it's interesting about this blues thing that comes from the poor side of the town, basically. What makes it about suffering that makes it into this deep, heartful music? And it's a trend all over, we can see. It's blues from the deep south, and it's blues from Portugal with
fado music.
Fado music. So it's a very interesting cross-cultural phenomena of women connecting to sorrow and to deep and kind of like putting it all out there for us to sympathize and maybe also, have a good cry while we're listening to this.
Yeah, definitely. And, someone like Sarah Ashkenazi, her folks were not particularly thrilled when she decided to pursue a life on the stage. It wasn't seen as something that was kind of reputable or honorable. And we can think of stories of other artists who had similar kinds of stories. Aretha Franklin is a good example. Her father, wanted her to go to the church. And she, although loved church music and performed church music throughout her lives, she wanted something different and something in a different vocabulary, one could say.
So next time when you think about Jewish women heroines, Rose Ashkenazi's totally up there.
Totally. And on that level, again, really important in terms of our journeys all across Europe and across Israel with our J-squared trips and adventures. The search for stories of resistance, of heroes, of people we can look at as role models. And of course, at least half of those people, of course, should be women.
But Greek music didn't stop at those times. And basically, we're kind of doing a jump here to talk about Greek music in Israel. So one of the biggest heroes, I think, that made a change here is Yehuda Poliker. Yehuda Poliker grew up in Kiryat Chaim, which is next to Haifa. Again, a working class town. His parents were Holocaust survivors from Thessaloniki who at the time were pretty silent about their experiences. But their silence became Yehuda Poliker's soundtrack. Saloniki Jews had a unique identity in Auschwitz, speaking Greek and Ladino. You can imagine, surrounded by Yiddish and German, how that feel. And also the journey they took was a very, very long journey. Isolated linguistically, yet known for their resilience, survivors recall singing Greek melodies in the camp as acts of defiance. Oh, my sweet Saloniki, my glorious homeland. Music was survivor. Chaki, chakili, Saloniki.
Mamash. And Poliker was already a star as the frontman for the popular rock band Benzine. Now, I remember when I first came to Israel in 1982, Ronit and I went to Haifa, and we went to see Benzine. I don't remember where. I don't remember much about the concert, but, already the charisma of this guy and the sound of rock and roll with a Mediterranean twist really, really spoke to me.
A breakthrough after, a little bit of military music, basically Israel moving into something else beyond Russian music that we kind of took upon ourselves. And that's what we grew up listening to.
No, definitely. And I think it has to do with changes in Israeli society. Again, 1977, the Likud first comes to power, the so-called earthquake, the overturning, the Mapach, and also in music. A lot of these albums, a lot of this music you can only buy in the Carmel market and in stalls in the Machane Yehuda market. And by 1985, Yehuda Polacker had put out his first album, Einayim Shali, his solo album. Bouzouki riffs come into Israeli pop. And it really was a different sound. 1988, an album that became a cornerstone of not just Israeli music, but of Israeli memory building, Ashes and Dust, Efer V'Avak, which was put together with the lyricist Yaakov Gilad, fusing Greek melodies, Holocaust testimonies, and Israeli rock, trying to work through trauma in an artistic form that contemporary people, young people, could understand. And so the album really shifted Holocaust memory from something abstract, something far away, to something more intimate. And the songs, they became part of national commemoration. Songs that when people first heard them, they kind of said, wait a second, what is that? And today they're part of ceremonies in, I'll dare to say, practically every Israeli high school and army unit all over the country when we come to that period of the year following Passover, when we mark Holocaust Remembrance Day.
ריחות לילך בין חורבות העיר שלך יום יפה לדון בנהר בתוכי הלב נשבר.
It's interesting that, Greek music had to go through the Holocaust in order to make it to mainstream. But that's something that we need to think about, and we're going to open up a little bit later. But to think about the revolutionary terms that happens with Efer V'Avak, first of all, the coin second generation was absolutely coined around that time. People starting to understand that Holocaust is not only about the survivors, but it's a trauma that's gone through generations. And now we're talking about third generation trauma and added a new one just recently. But Yehuda Polacker and Yaakov Gilad, major breakthrough in Israeli society and Israeli music and Israeli culture, and one cannot imagine who we are without them.
The comment you made now about second generation trauma and the beginning to understand that was a thing, that was a phenomenon, that was real. So I remember in the movie version of Efer V'Avak.
It's called Biglal HaMilchama Ahi, because of that war. The film director is Ona Bendel. Check it out if you can.
Amazing film. And really to see the movie alongside listening to the album, it really is an incredible experience. One of the scenes I remember apropos to second generation, I hope I'm getting it right, but I have this memory of Polacker telling the story. He remembers as a kid in Kiryat Yam, his parents were very, very protective. And whenever he went out, whenever he was around in the neighborhood, etc., they would always want to know where he was. And he remembers standing inside the basketball court and his dad coming and holding on to the link chain fence and just calling out,
Yehuda.
Yuda, are you okay? Is everything okay? Yes, Abba, everything is okay. And you can imagine kind of the annoyance in his voice as a, 10, 11, 12, 13-year-old, let alone as a teenager. Yehuda, are you okay? Is everything okay? And this issue of what does that do to a child to live under that weight of anxiety carried by a parent because of those horrific historical events that are part of the parent's autobiography.
Right. There was a time when you opened the radio and there was a song about Treblinka at the radio, not because of a memorial ceremony, just playing on the radio playlist. That's a little bit mind-blowing. But the Greek phenomena in Israel, the Greek music phenomena in Israel didn't start with Polikel. It started a little bit earlier. There was a little bit of a, how do we say it? There was a Greek craze. Let's call it what it was. There was a Greek craze between the 1950s and the 1980s that was a powerful grassroots kind of moment that came from clubs in Jaffa, clubs in Ramle, clubs who started playing Greek music, having live music, sometimes people, musicians coming from Greek and from Cyprus to play that music. The most famous one is Ali San, who basically ruled also the music charts at some point in Israel. People going out, well-dressed, out on a night to hear Greek music, to dance, and to get moved, basically.
Right. And I think that that kind of a picture of people heading out to these clubs to hear music that was not considered mainstream. Mm-hmm. And we have a mix of people, people who are coming from European backgrounds, people who are coming from Middle Eastern backgrounds, but are searching for something that, among other things, is joyful, is open, is a bit wild, at least based on what was happening in Israeli taste during that period of the 50s and 60s. And again, it reminds of the kind of search for the wild sound that also was taking place in the United States as America moved from the end of the Second World War to greater prosperity, to a search for its own identity, and the emergence of figures, of course, like Johnny Cash, like Elvis Presley, the search for something which was considered not safe, not nice, a bit wild.
Right. So the dream of going to a club and smashing a plate is a very long Israeli dream that people still, there's a club in Jerusalem, Madonna Yavani, where people go, and there's specific plates for you to smash while you hear music.
Part of the issue connected with Greek and what became known as Mediterranean music also was about identity and Israel's own internal changes. From 1948 through the 1950s, the population of Israel grew incredibly. Mass immigration, the population doubled and tripled. And many of those people, of course, were Jews who were coming to Israel from all across North Africa and the Middle East. But there was a catch here. There was a hook. They were coming from countries that the Israeli establishment were tense about. There was a reality of the end of the 1948 war, the Suez Campaign in 1956, and the sense that Israel was the lonely villa in a hostile jungle. How did that tag? How did that impact on Jews who were coming from Morocco, from Iraq, who grew up in Arabic and Arabic Middle Eastern music? Yet somehow when they came to Israel, part of them was considered the enemy. And so part of the turn to Greek music, the Mediterranean sound, was also a way for people to contend with, hey, I'm still proud of who I am. I still want to hold on to that piece of me that I left behind.
So in some way, what I'm hearing you saying is like the move to Greek music being more consensus is because it was a subtle way to connect to our roots that are Middle Eastern, but without having that Arabic part, because Arabic is the enemy's language, because Arabic is too foreign for us, and also because of the Arabic music and the quarter tones that we're not used to in a Western ear, was a little bit too hard to digest for mainstream Israel. So Greek music became that segue from Arabic music to what we call today Middle Eastern music, which is a little bit of a whitewashing or an interesting way to say music that is not from Western Europe, basically.
No, 100%. And again, the historical reality of the state of Israel was in the 1940s as the state was born, in the 1950s, and through the 1960s, one could say up until the 1970s, the Israeli establishment was basically Ashkenazi. It was basically people who came to this country from European backgrounds. And so the Middle East was something that was seen as not only strange, but again, because of the reality of conflict, was seen as enemy. And the question of how Jews began to see each other as they re-met in the new state of Israel, under all the difficult historical circumstances that brought us together from Germany, from Russia, from Iraq, from Libya, from Algeria, etc., how we re-met and began to rebuild our senses of self. What do we have in common? What do we share? And also, how are we different? And holding on to all those pieces, which sometimes is a tough equation to build, but is, I think, part of the reality of definitely of Israel and of any immigrant society. It was especially sharp in that period when, again, we were a young country. And so questions of identity seem to be so much more acute, perhaps, than they are maybe today when we're more mature. And that's also a question in and of itself,
right.
How these questions emerge, fall into the background, and then reemerge at times of difficulty.
I think questions of identity and where we came from and where our family came from is very much still up there. Maybe we call it in different names, just like we call Eastern music, Middle Eastern music, just to make us feel a little bit better. But it's definitely out there in the Israeli society discourse that it's very much permanent. Also in politics as well. And identity, music, and politics sometimes go together. And that is maybe a question that we were asking ourselves, all right, how does music portray who you are or who you want to be?
Yeah, definitely. Say something about that, about the who you want to be.
I think there's a few suggestions by researchers that why is the Greek music such a huge hit in Israel? And maybe because we want to be part of the neighborhood. Maybe because we want to be considered Middle Eastern. We love being part of the region. It's about food. It's about olive oil. It's about the weather. It's about the Mediterranean. So let's be globalizing ourselves. And we are very much like our friends from Greece. I think this year, Israelis toured Greece in such huge numbers, even though they weren't always welcome, because of that dream that people have, that this is the neighborhood that we are at. And yes, we have neighbors that are closer to us, but we can't feel at home there yet. Maybe one day. But Greek is kind of a way to escape to that. And Greek music is part of that.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's interesting because this kind of what some people call the Mediterranean turn, it seemed to gain cultural traction in the 1990s. So on the one hand, you have like globalization, as you mentioned, writ large, and the expansion of markets and new technologies, and kind of the sense that we aren't necessarily held back by our national borders. The whole world is a village. And that was definitely very present in the international scale or international forums in the 90s. Mm-hmm. But in Israel, especially in the early 90s, before Yitzhak Rabin was assassinated, Zichrono Livracha, there was also hope in Israel. Hey, the conflict, maybe it's behind us. Maybe there's a way out. Maybe we can move to something where Israel is going to be more normal. And this Mediterranean turn that became, I think, an Israeli discourse, much more popular in the 1990s, was part of those two things, the global piece and also the aspiration or hope that, you know what, maybe the conflict is behind us.
Let's quote David Ochana. He's a historian, David Ochana, who articulates this intellectual idea. And he says, the Mediterranean option, he argues that Israel is a Mediterranean society in the making, which allows Israeli to find their identity in a complex synthesis of East and West, where they do not have to choose between local and global. And I think that's totally sums it up.
Yeah, especially, I mean, that line, not having to choose between the local and the global. Today, 2025, almost 2026, it seems like we're forced to choose between those two pieces of ourselves all the time because of the current situation. Mm-hmm. As a cultural trend, this Mediterranean term may be also pointed to what Hanan Chever calls a weakening of the Zionist meta-narrative and the emergence of alternative cultural geographies. I mean, we even mentioned it in the very beginning today when we talked about this idea of, wait a second, Temple Times? You mean alongside the independent Maccabees and a Jewish Commonwealth, there were Jews in the diaspora? Uh-oh! But I think Hanan Chever is, kind of pointing to that and pointing to the possibilities today. I mean, you look at Israelis taking foreign citizenships. You look at young Israelis going to live from Cyprus to Toronto to Berlin. This question of where's the narrative and how do we reformulate it to make sense of who we are and who we want to be? Again, that's part of what's going on, right? All the time in society. Totally resonates.
But like when we're talking about the Greek turn, but there's also an other side to it. But maybe that's a way of actually, some people suggest, repressing Mizrahi Jewish voices that were...
Mizrahi meaning Jewish Middle Eastern.
Exactly. Voices that were shut down and that had to hide who they are, who had to turn off the Arabic music when your friends come over. And now that Greek is exceptional, maybe it's our way to cope with it and say, oh, we're just listening to Middle Eastern music, but we're not listening to Moroccan music or Andalusi music or music that our parents grew up in the synagogue in Marrakesh or in the synagogue in Baghdad or even, Abdel Wahab or other major Arabic composers and singers that were less definitely mainstream. So could it be something that we were kind of avoiding coping with? It's hard to say. But nowadays, when you open the radio, there's what we call Middle Eastern pop, where I think most of the people from the outside won't even notice who's other pop, who's Middle Eastern pop. It's all the same rhythm. It's all the same auto-tune. Some are great, some are horrible. But definitely the mainstream of Israel right now is Middle Eastern beats and rhythms. And like what in the 50s and in the 60s we listened to in the radio, that's a specific hour where the oldies listen to. But it's definitely not mainstream.
Yeah, for sure. And again, it points to that these things are so incredibly fluid. And even in Israel's short history, there are styles and changes and waves of fashion that go in and out. But it's not fashion in the sense of like something that you pick up and throw down without thinking about it. It develops over time based on this sense, this desire to share your story, to share who you are. And again, it goes back to some of the things we mentioned even at the beginning of the Jewish women who pioneered Rebetika, of the Romaniote community and their attempt to synthesize between local Greek, in this case Byzantine sounds, and Jewish prayer and chanting. And the same thing is happening today. Different technologies, different instruments, different voices, but the question remains the same. Music as an expression, not just a voice in the literal sense, but voice in the sense of who I am, who I want to be.
So in the search of good Greek music, Israelis are going to Greece and finding authentic singers. And there's a lot of singers actually who come and fill up stadiums. Nikos Vertis was just here in the summer, filled up a huge stadium of Israelis knowing all the lyrics in Greek. But when you go to Greece, make sure that you check out the music, find out a taverna, look what's playing on the radio, and think about it a little bit more deeply. What does my music say about me? What does it say about my identity? How open am I to other musics affecting me and my taste? Because how open am I to other identities making me change? That is a huge question that is always out there. And also look at your playlist and think about it a little bit. Does that playlist say who I am, or does it say who do I want to be?
And now, something for the road. A tip, a recommendation to help you make every journey your own.
Hi, I'm Tally, a project manager at J Square Adventures. It's great to be on the podcast today. A bit of background about myself. I studied religious studies and philosophy at university in Edinburgh in Scotland. And then I came to Israel 4 years ago to study film at the Tel Aviv University here. Since then, I made Aliyah and now I live here and I'm really enjoying working in travel and tourism. My something for the road is barakas. A couple of years ago, I went on an adventure, a car rally, where me and my friend took a little old car and drove from London to Armenia and back. We crossed, I think, about 22 countries in 2.5 months. And one moment that really stood out for me was when we were in Greece and we had driven up to Meteora, which is an area, beautiful landscape full of these dramatic mountains, like skinny pillars kind of poking up in the sky, and on top are these incredible monasteries. And you just can't help but wonder how they were built and how they're still standing there. And as we were there, we stopped for some lunch at a little cafe and I ordered this baraka. And my knowledge of barakas was the Israeli bakery ones. So I ordered one here and it was phyllo pastry, stuffed, I think, with feta cheese, sesame seeds on top, and honey. And I've never had honey with a baraka before, but it was delicious. It was the best. I finished it so fast. I definitely came back from that trip with a newfound appreciation for barakas and a recipe that is a kind of similar take on that. And again, also a bit different from the classic Israeli one that I really recommend that I do myself at home is a rice paper baraka. It's so easy. It's healthier. Also, if you're like me and try to avoid gluten some of the time, you soak the rice paper a little bit in some egg yolk, and then you fill it with anything you want. You can put cheese, you can even put like meat inside, the usual fillings, and then you roll it up and you twirl it into a spiral, more egg yolk, some sesame seeds on top, and then just pop it in the oven. And then obviously have it with honey. That's something I always do now. Since my trip to Greece, I always have a baraka with honey. So as many of the listeners might remember from their time with us in Israel, having and seeing the barakas in the markets, in the shirks, and everywhere in Israel, there were like 3 usual types. There's the triangle ones, the square ones, and the round pizza. I don't even know if you can call it a baraka, but the pizza type baraka. So let me tell you an interesting fact about that, which I also recently came to learn, is that all the triangle ones are dairy and filled with a type of cheese, and all the square ones have no milk and are filled with potato usually. And this was actually done by the chief rabbinate in Israel for kashrut reasons, to make sure that people who didn't want to have dairy weren't accidentally biting in to a dairy baraka. This is something that I think Israelis are either like, I've never heard that before, or they're like, oh no, of course everyone knows that. So it's just a little fun fact. And also, if for some reason you can't eat potato or dairy, it's a very useful fact to know which one is which. So to take away from this, just remember that a baraka is not always just a baraka, and that there are many different types, and you can try out quite easily a lot of different recipes at home. And I'm looking forward to you joining us soon at J Square Adventures for either an authentic Greek or Israeli baraka.
Thanks for listening. Dive deeper into the world of travel on our J Squared Adventures website. That's jsquaredadventures.com. And stay in the loop with our latest adventures on all our social media platforms. Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn, all under J2 Adventures.
And if you enjoyed hanging out with us, don't forget to leave us a comment, review, and subscribe wherever you get your podcast. Until next time, travel safely and keep wondering. I'm Rivka.
I'm Scott. See you soon at J Squared Adventures, Wandering Jews.